Okay. It's the camera. The camera's not refreshing. That's delightful.
Cool. So that's just me looking at my phone.
Yeah, good.
Apparently,
We
it's
have
better so far.
I imagine it probably is much better so far.
If the
Yeah.
camera was
The
working.
camera had decided to work.
Cool. Now I can just watch my face on delay. That's great. That's exactly what I want.
Everyone
Trek.
wants Gato.
And
Tech
me,
difficulties.
Kato's is working fine. It's just-
Kato
I am.
and as is cleavage.
I am a modern day Narcissus. Just
You
oh,
are. We
oh,
love
it's
you.
me. Oh, hello. Aren't I great? Yeah. So, chat is telling me that things are working better. Mitch
Yeah,
is still under a table, unfortunately. Where were we, guys? Klingons back with his Snoglix. That's where we were.
Yeah, that is Snoglex. So we're just gonna do a quick thing.
Quick thing. Okay.
Now, really is just Kato.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
guys, let's talk about combat.
Let's
Ship
go back to
combat
back
is
on.
one of the most delightful ways
Yeah,
that
well,
you can
we're not there
advance
at all
plot
I-
in a story. That I can't tell if my talking is distracting them from actually maybe fixing this problem, so I worry. But anyway, ship combat is definitely very much one of the best ways that you can advance combat because everyone has to be involved in a shared collaborative space. And instead of everyone making their own decisions, you have to have that coordination where everyone is communicating well. Now, I don't want to get into character reveals because we will definitely touch on them later on, but we so far haven't had a tactical officer or anyone from security who would really take the lead on the attack kind of style of the ship, which means that probably, especially given that Sam has recently in Shield of Tomorrow played that tactical space, it's very likely that we're going to see a captain-led combat situation with Sam sort of taking the lead again, using the experience they got from Shield to really create a synergistic captain-led combat style, which I'm really hoping is going to be for the best. Of course, we still have one more character to reveal, and I know absolutely nothing about who Gina is playing, so maybe I will be proved horribly wrong. But either way, they are in a much, much bigger ship with a much higher capacity to take it as well as dish it out, so I can only imagine what we will see is some more exciting ship combat in the future, because Eric knows I'm here, watching, the whole time. Waiting for my combat. Where is my combat, Eric? Yeah. What else would we like to talk about, chat? Because it is just me, and they haven't come back. And I'm all alone here in the dark. Does anyone have any questions about mechanics? Or, anything else that Kato's might know about? Because otherwise we could just go back to talking Klingons, just me and you, stream. Just me and you. Huh. See, the problem is even Twitch chat is on a delay. I'm like a person, an astronaut, deep in space, trying to communicate with Earth, but waiting several sort of seconds to minutes to get any response. And I get to sit here in the void by myself. Oh, I've got a question for Geek Outs now. See, the lag is great. Saying, in your experience, what is the hardest mechanical concept that new players struggle with? That's a really interesting question. I think properly new players to absolutely any kind of role-playing game, the biggest concept people struggle with is the notion of how much freedom you have in a role-playing game. So it's very much that kind of, okay, you're here, let's take the D&D example, you're in a bar, you've got a couple of people around you. What do you do? And people go, I don't know. What can I do? Can I talk to people? And you're like, yeah, you can talk to
You're
people.
not on the BRB screen.
You can swing off a chandelier in the ceiling if you want. Like that's one of the options you have. And I think that like the breadth of what your choices are can be really scary. And this goes back to stuff that's very sort of foundational for improv, which is that having absolutely every choice in the world is actually very limiting for our brains. You really need, in order to be able to sort of really react and think up things on the fly, you need to be given a space to play with it and a box. And once you have the definitions of the box, you can go, this is the space I'm playing with, and you can play inside or outside of the box. But you need to have that box and have that definition. Because if it's like, think of anything, literally anything, your brain freezes up because there's nothing to sort of build off of, which is why you see in improv people going, give me a place people might meet, or give me a food, rather than just going, give me something, anything, because that is just
Kato,
bad for
I
our brains.
believe
Yeah?
we have video and
Okay.
audio of
I
everyone.
can't see you guys. I'm still
Oh,
alone
I
in
can-
my
oh, I-
infinite void.
What I need Kayla.
Oh yeah, we forgot to switch you on Skype. So I believe from the frustrated hand gestures Mitch was making at me from the computer that our fancy camera died. So we're on fancy webcam now.
Oh, exciting. Yeah, so possibly everyone can see everyone now. I did get some more questions. So I think Buddha Fox asked how diplomats are in play. I will touch on that when we get to diplomats. Apparently they can't. Eric can't hear you. Are you getting better? Can you talk for me for a sec?
Well, I've just maxed out our volume, so hopefully.
Okay. So hopefully it is getting better.
Technical difficulties.
Brilliant. I like that Eric is just sending me messages, just criticizing, just being like, he's being very helpful. It's really great because there's a little bit more lag. So I'm getting the Eric messages a little bit more quickly than I am getting your chat messages, but chat is being very helpful as well. Yeah. As a Mitch are way quieter, but they've maxed out their mic, unfortunately, guys.
Way better, apparently.
Yeah, we've just maxed it out. So hopefully, fingers crossed. Yay! Technical difficulties. Don't you love it when everything works exactly how you want?
Exactly.
Yay!
Oh.
We're professional streamers, we're not.
Apparently. No, we're not
Brilliant.
at all. No one's paying us.
Hi, babies.
Oh,
Yeah.
Also, if you hear squeaking, it's probably the rats.
Yeah.
My
You may meet the rats
children.
in future.
Brilliant. So
I'm
yeah,
still trying to convince them with my picture of Az plays with rats for an hour and just talks about Dragon Age.
I mean, we can do that while we're trying to work out why everything has gone wrong today.
Maybe. We'll see.
Okay. It sounds like everyone is sort of back to vaguely normal and okay. And yeah, I will get to that question about diplomats when we get to maybe some character discussion in a little bit. There was also a discussion about what I would like to try alcohol-wise apart from Romulan ale. I am just going to answer this because for fun, I am very much the kind of person that, when I was younger, I was very into that kind of like the masculinity ideal that you have to drink liquors like straight and you can't like drinks that taste nice, like the girly drinks, quote unquote, like cocktails. And I maybe overinvested that a little bit too hard. So I now very much like I do drink rum straight, I do drink whiskey straight. And I do like the flavor of both because I have learned to appreciate that kind of over time. I would so drink blood wine on a dare. I would drink blood wine to prove that I was absolutely as manly as the manliest Klingon, or as Klingon, as the most Klingon a Klingon can be, despite being human and not really adapted to it. I am very much about disgusting drink challenges or bad to drink challenges.
Drink blood wine and punch a Klingon in the face. Like,
yeah, I would make that exact bad decision.
What is the manliest way to drink blood wine? Is it like snorting it?
I think
it's a bad time.
No,
I didn't
it's
say it was a bad time. I didn't ask if it was manly.
It's while using a batleth to decapitate one of your enemies. That's how you do it. So you've got the blood wine in one hand and the batleth in the other hand, and you're just like casually decapitating enemies as you go,
and swilling
the blood
before
wine.
you go. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Glad we cleared that up.
Yeah. So Klingons.
Back to the Snoglix.
Back to the Snoglix. Our favorite dwarves.
Yeah. I think they are more orcs than dwarves because we know who the dwarves are in Star Trek. It's the Tellarites. These guys are just orcs. Yeah, so I can't remember where we got to, or I don't know where we got to before the stream just up and died on us.
Yeah.
But yeah, Klingons have an empire. They're very big on warriors. They're very down on farmers and science, but those people do still exist within the empire. And they're slightly less unified than the Federations, where the Federation has one big unified fleet. All of the individual houses will have their own ships and their own kind of petty squabbles, as well as the Klingon Defense Force, which is the more kind of unified Klingon guys, Klingon sort of fleet. What that means, unfortunately, is if you annoy one of the houses, no matter whether or not the Federation or the Klingons are at peace, if you annoy one of the houses, they will send ships after you because of personal feuds. So it's a little bit more of a delicate dance with the Klingons to make sure you're not stepping on anyone's toes, because you really, really, really do not want to be involved in a Klingon house feud.
I mean, unless you really, really want to get in a fight.
Yeah.
There are better ways to get in a fight than to join a Klingon house feud.
I I'm reminded of that episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender where they want to start a riot, and they try and start a riot by insulting someone, and they're like, no, why are you being horribly mean to us? And they're like, we just want to start a riot. He's like, okay, fine. And so he just picks someone up and he's like, hey guys, do you want to start a riot? And everyone is like, yeah.
It just throws him.
Yeah, and it's like that bit on Whose Line Is It Anyway, where they're like top things to say, things that are likely to start a fight. Just you guys want to start a fight?
Yeah, that is how the Klingons work. Fortunately or unfortunately, they're very easy to start conflict with because they like doing it. It's something they enjoy, and it's something that is culturally that's something they value.
Sure.
So yeah, there's a little bit of history. Obviously, they're an old empire, been around since the Earth's 9th century, founded by Kahless, who is kind of their god, and kind of their first emperor. Yeah, but we probably don't need to dwell on all of that. Suffice to say, Klingons, one of the most important races out here in the Beta Quadrant.
We've got the weird moon horse in the top.
Yeah, so that's thanks for hosting us, Small Lulu. And thanks for subscribing, Gamer Prince.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I just saw his bug eyes go in the top, and I was like, which one is that?
We cannot, in fact, have subscribers. I guess you guys are going to do the nice social things, and I'm going to be like, let's talk about other races.
Let's talk about my boys, the Holy Roman Empire.
Again, the Romulan Star Empire. They're not the Holy Roman Empire. They're the actual Roman Empire, but in space. Important distinctions, all right?
Oh, yes, very important distinctions, despite the fact that their history is just the history of the Holy Roman Empire.
No, it's the history of the Roman Empire. It hasn't got into the Holy Roman Empire now. We're in the fall of Rome.
Mitch.
Yeah, they're the Romulan Star Empire, and they are the equivalent of the Roman Empire.
Oh.
That's Toge's
history.
I'm sorry.
and not Hungary.
Henry VIII was.
I'm not English!
All right. Anyway,
ask any of the Americans, they won't know who Henry VIII is.
All right, chat. Do you know who Henry VIII is? Because I'm trying to settle a feud here.
So anyway, the Romulans are the Vulcans' meaner cousins wearing leather jackets. So that's
a good. Yep, I'll let that flow.
I mean that is effectively what they are. They used to be Vulcans. Way back in the 4th century, there was a big split because the Vulcans were having this big problem because they were really emotional and they were fighting all the time. And the Vulcans met this guy called Surak who said, hey, let's be logical, let's suppress our emotions and try and deal with things in a logical manner and not worry about emotion at all. And most of the Vulcans were like, that sounds great. This other guy called Apnex was like, no, that sucks, let's keep fighting each other. And he left with a bunch of people to start the Romulan Empire. They are very, very secretive, the Romulans.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so when they first appeared, they were at war with the Federation for 5 years before anyone in the Federation saw what anyone looked like. That is how secretive these guys are. So they are known for being kind of really good at spying, at subterfuge, at all that kind of espionage stuff. So it might be important to know, for example, the Tal Shiar are the Romulan intelligence agency.
Oh,
and they are so good at infiltrating the Federation because guess what? There's a bunch of people that look like space elves in the Federation called the Vulcans, and guess who looks like the Vulcans? It's the Romulans. So they're really good.
Take off the leather jackets and they're in.
Yeah, exactly. Another sort of important aspect of the Romulans that you probably should know at this point for this series is that they do. Within the Romulan Star Empire, there are other races and species that exist, and the most important one probably is the Remans. Do you remember what I said about this being the Roman Empire but in space? Yeah, that's right. Romulus and Remus from the classic sort of Earth legend. And the Remans are a group of people who the Romulans have been using as a slave race for a long time now. They're very physically robust, they're a little bit telepathic, and kind of where we are right now in 2381, the Remans are involved in an ongoing process of fighting for their freedom from the Romulans. So they are a pretty cool race. They're in the Star Trek Adventures books, and it's quite possible we're going to see some Remans popping up in this show, in Clear Skies.
Yeah, I'm excited for I'm excited for Klingons and Romulans for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a but there.
But I'm more excited for some of the more weirder.
More weirder.
I want to see some Borg.
Okay, the Borg are not from the Beta Quadrant. I agree that the Borg are cool, but they're not from the Beta Quadrant. I was trying to cover sort of people that you might see pop up in the Beta Quadrant, and now obviously we discovered some things.
Also,
We
can
did.
Today.
Has Cal shown up? Because I feel like we just summoned
Yeah,
him.
I just said the B word.
We just said the B word, and
Yeah, Callisto, our resident Borg expert, will probably be along to tell us literally everything we need to know.
A resident Borg Trexpert. Come on, Kato. Like, get with the program.
Oh, see, you couldn't get me to say half of those words on the podcast. You think you're going to get me to make
No, not a
any of
chance.
those mistakes now?
I
No.
will one day make you say crunch. One day.
You wish. So the important thing that I was going to say was that I wrote a list of other important species that might pop up, and one of the ones I mentioned was the Orions, because the Orions are also native to the Beta Quadrant. And obviously, I wrote a lot about the Orions to talk about them, not knowing necessarily what we were going to know about our captain, which we found out a little over an hour ago now.
Yes.
Yeah. So the Orions, for those of you who don't know, are a species of green-skinned space aliens. They have a legitimate trade union, and they also have a very non-legitimate crime syndicate. And they historically were a race of people that dealt a lot in slavery, particularly in trading their own women and their own people to other parts of the galaxy. And obviously
one
this was...
whole yike.
Yeah. It gets better. So the retcon they tried to do to sort of make this slightly better than just, green-skinned sort of space babe, was that it turns out that the Orions are controlled by pheromones, and that female Orions have much, much more powerful pheromones than the male Orions, and they basically control the men. And this applies not just to Orion men, but anyone who is attracted to women across most species. And this whole slavery thing they were going for was actually how this very powerful group of people in this matriarchy were infiltrating and spying on other parts of the galaxy.
A terrible day for disaster space lesbians.
Yeah.
Indeed. And we saw them in Shield of Tomorrow as well.
Yeah.
Amusingly, with our boy, the stupid sexy Zazaret.
Yeah.
But also, amusingly, having no effect on asexual people.
Yeah, so this is another way that kind of Eric, as a creator, is really good at updating very dated sort of mythos and sort of using it in a good way. In that traditionally what it has been is that all men are just vulnerable to the wiles of the female Orion and their pheromones, which is, a bit dated.
And then there's George Takei.
And disaster bisexual captain.
Yeah. And so then it became, under Eric, it became this thing of like, no, this only applies if you experience attraction to these people. So if you're a guy and you experience attraction to guys, if you're a guy and you experience attraction to women, it will affect you. If you're a woman and you experience attraction to women, it will affect you. If not, you're non-binary, you experience attraction to women, it will affect you. But if you're not, it will not. Which is going to add some interesting sort of dimensions and complexity, I think, to how Clear Skies works.
Absolutely, when we get into a little bit more with the captain.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then outside of the Orion, there is another delightful species in the Beta Quadrant.
Yeah, just worth mentioning, the other sort of big species from the Beta Quadrant sourcebook in Star Trek Adventures is the Gorn hegemony, which is basically a collection of very long-lived and primarily lizard-like species. And that's all I have really to say about them. They're the Gorn. They're big lizards. I didn't even
love them.
They get punched by Kirk, and that's about it.
Yeah, they're really great. But they have very little kind of concrete canon about them. So they're another sort of way in which I think Modiphius has been very clever in choosing to use the Shackleton Expanse and the Beta Quadrant as the setting, because the Shackleton Expanse is this big unexplored space, so you have lots of options to add in new species as you see fit and sort of change a lot of what's going on without necessarily being totally affected by the politics of what's happening in the Alpha Quadrant. And the Gorn are a great example where there's not a lot in canon, which means every GM and every creator can sort of sketch in the details for themselves and create their own stories.
Absolutely, which is absolutely tops.
Which is tops.
And do we want so this is going to be I think same as Shield of Tomorrow, a little bit Deep Space Nine, a little bit Voyager, a little bit TNG, based around Narendra Station.
So you want me to talk about Narendra Station? Is that
this unifying place between the Klingons and the Federation.
Yeah, so Narendra Station is also known as Starbase 364. It's orbiting the Narendra star around the site of Narendra 3, which was historically a Klingon colony. There was a big historical battle on Narendra 3 where the Romulans came and surprise attacked the Klingons. And the Enterprise C came and rescued the Klingons and saved the colony, which kind of led to peace between the two parties and was a start of the thawing of relations between the two species. If you want to catch that, Yesterday's Enterprise is the TNG episode that I would recommend. Yesterday's Enterprise is one like my favorite episode of TNG, and a really nice kind of time travel, complicated episode. So it's a symbol of kind of alliance between the two groups, and even when there's conflict between the Klingons and the Federation, it more or less is a sort of stable, peaceful place. So there's both Klingon and Starfleet personnel on it. There's a sort of a mixed senior staff overseeing it, and there are sort of individual and joint projects. So the Klingons are doing their own thing, the Federation are doing their own thing. There's a little bit of mixing, but it's this nice sort of cooperative, collaborative project.
Which kind of does lend itself to the fact that there are the two crews working around Narendra Station, which we will hopefully learn more about sometime soon. And I know that Eric's already spoken about the fact that the Klingon show will air maybe once a month concurrently. In the same spot with Clear Skies, giving our lovely regular crew a break, hopefully. Though we may see some of them playing dual roles.
Yeah, and probably...
So just to clarify on the Klingon game, is Eliza running it, or is Eliza captaining?
Eliza is the captain. Okay. I believe Eric will be running both games.
Sure.
So it's a break for everyone except Eric, which is a classic Eric decision.
Classic Eric move.
Eric is notorious for having never taken a break in his life ever.
Once. I think he went on holiday once.
He came here and did more D&D.
No, he went on the burn once.
He did go to the burn once. Brackets one time.
Eric has taken one holiday.
Yes.
So those are the key kind of species and places that I would say are important to sort of be aware of coming into this show and coming into Clear Skies. I would like to talk a little bit about the history.
Yeah, for sure. We're not fresh out of, but quite recently out of the Dominion War.
Man, yeah. I could just literally sit here and just listen to Kato talk about Trek for hours.
Kato's the best. We love the Kato.
Okay.
This is very much not my episode of Beyond the Stars, because I'll be jumping right in with like all the acting and characterization choices. Yeah. So I'm like, I'm just gonna leave the history to you guys and just sit here and listen.
This episode is tragically both a test episode and also an episode where I just get to talk about all of the stuff that I have been galaxy braiding, my big red string conspiracy board about what's going to happen, and all of these sort of important elements. Information. Yeah, hopefully to give people who maybe aren't as familiar with Trek a bit of a sort of prelude. Obviously, I am massively stressed about this because I have no idea what Eric is doing or planning. I don't even know what species Gina is playing or what role Gina is having. So, I worry that people are going to use words or reference episodes that I didn't anticipate, that like history that I didn't think about will come up, and I'll be like, oh, I could have told them about that, but I can't see the future, so you're just going to have to
cover everything.
Yeah, we're just going to have to do the best we can. So the year is 2381 by the sort of modern Earth reckoning, and by that I mean my modern.
The year of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, the contemporary Earth reckoning. It is 2381. Important events in the galaxy recently. We had the Dominion War between 2373 and 2375. So that was the Federation, the Klingons, and the Romulans against the Dominion. The Dominion are from the Gamma Quadrant. They're a group of subjugated races ruled by a group called the Founders, or the Changelings, and the Changelings can turn into any organic or non-organic substance and therefore infiltrate their enemies really well. So yeah, Team Gamma Quadrant then was the Dominion, an Alpha Quadrant-based group called the Cardassian Union, until 2375, at which point they changed sides, and a couple of other Alpha Quadrant people who allied themselves with the Dominion because they felt that was their best shot at sort of surviving and having a place in the future of the galaxy. So that's the Breen and the Sonar.
The Breen is so cool.
Yeah, broadly, Team Gamma Quadrant lost, so the Dominion was defeated and cut off from the Alpha Quadrant by sort of interference with the wormhole that was linking the two parts of the galaxy, which meant that there was victory for the Alpha Quadrant, so the Federation and the Klingons, who'd been fighting since the beginning. Then the Romulan Star Empire and the Bajoran Republic both joined in 2374, and then the Cardassian Liberation Front, and then later the Cardassian Union, as sort of Cardassian politics changed. So the Cardassians switched sides as the government was sort of changing across. In 2375. So that's kind of the big historical thing, is that there was this big war. Very much there was this infiltration by people who could look like anyone and who could replace your friends, which led to a lot of paranoia and suspicion. But it's important for lots of reasons, such as the Romulans, the Klingons, and the Federation are all working together for the first time, and the Cardassians, who have historically been antagonistic at best towards the Federation, and who the Federation had been at war with in the past, actually came on side and started to help repel the Dominion in the end. So because of the sort of shared goals, the sort of incursion from another part of the galaxy onto the Alpha Quadrant, there's been a lot of shifting in recent politics, and people who were previously enemies maybe might be started to thought of as be friends, in fact. So that's quite interesting, broadly.
I think even more interesting considering our chief science officer.
Yeah. So I think definitely the fact that the Cardassians changed sides in the Dominion War and eventually actually fought against the Dominion probably has played a huge role in how accepted Cardassians are, given that even sort of immediately prior to the Dominion War or during the Dominion War, there was a lot of resentment because obviously you were having Federation fighting the Cardassians, and you could easily have that kind of situation of going, well, the Cardassians killed my best friend, and a lot of blame there. It's also important because in 2376, Bajor joins the Federation. Bajor was, lovely. Yeah, they're great. Bajor is this planet.
Yeah.
Space Jews.
they're genuinely delightful. Bajor is this planet that used to be occupied by Cardassia and by the Cardassian Union, and who were very sort of repressed, and their people, the Bajorans, eventually fought, and their own resistance led to sort of repelling the Cardassians off of their planet, and the Federation was there kind of as a neutral party, but sort of ultimately trying to support Bajoran independence, which obviously created more tension with the Cardassians. And they have been in a process of kind of gradually recovering from occupation and finding their place in the universe and the galaxy. But kind of when they join the Federation, obviously that means they've become a little bit more accepted and a little bit more understood, hopefully, by the Federation as a whole. But it also means they started to do things like request extradition of key figures who were part of the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, who committed sort of serious war crimes during that time. So there's a sort of actual... Yeah, so there's actually quite a really big and important process of kind of pushing for peace and reconciliation. And if you want, just watch Deep Space Nine. It's a really beautifully set up series about lots of the sort of the more complex issues around recovering from occupation by a foreign power, trying to ally yourself with another foreign power, and whether or not you can maintain your identity in that kind of situation, and about finding the ability to... genuinely about sort of finding the ability to go, not everyone who looks like the people that hurt me is the person that hurt me, and finding the capacity to forgive in your heart a group of people who didn't all hurt you, and to place blame in the right places, and to genuinely say, this person is responsible for the crimes that they did. This person is not responsible. You cannot blame an entire society necessarily for the crimes of one person. And how much should an entire society be made to suffer depending on how conscious they were or aware they were of the atrocities being committed. It is a beautifully complex series. It doesn't pretend that there are any simple answers. And it's definitely very much worth thinking about that. But Bajor joining the Federation is a big part of the start of that process.
And then after that, your lovely, lovely captain has returned from sea.
Excuse me. She is a vice admiral.
She's a vice admiral. How dare you?
Yeah. So the other big events of the 2370s, obviously, was that Voyager was lost in the Delta Quadrant between 2371 and 2378. For details of that, 7 years, watch Star Trek Voyager. Literally, that's probably the best thing you can do.
So that's
But-
your homework. Just watch 2 entire shows.
Yeah,
before
that's only
tomorrow.
14 seasons of Star Trek. It's fine. I'm trying to succinctly cover the sort of key events in Trek history up to this point, particularly because with the end of Voyager, everything that is taking place in 2381 and past is part of the post-Trek timeline in a lot of ways. So we may see some overlap with Picard, though I've been hearing some things that suggest that Picard is an alternate universe and may not actually be in the Prime Trek timeline. And obviously
Isn't everything that's not everything post like Enterprise is non-Trek Prime timeline, isn't it?
Discovery is officially Prime, I believe.
Oh, is it? Oh, that's
Yeah. Yes.
I like Discovery.
Let's not get into Discovery now because literally we do not have the time. Maybe we can do a What the Federation about the different types of Trek. But yeah, 2381 is that point where there's no official canon in the shows that you can necessarily draw on to say what's been happening. Once Voyager's return, that's kind of the end of where the shows have been leading up to. Picard might cover that, but obviously Eric can't read the minds of the Picard creators, so isn't going to be able to keep his canon in line with their canon. So really
Come on,
what
Eric.
I'm
Pick it up. Get that telepathy going.
gain that telepathy. But the other important thing is broadly that Star Trek Online is set even sort of further in the future, and so some of what's going on in 2381 is covered by the existence of Star Trek Online, who have filled in a lot of details. So Voyager comes back from the Delta Quadrant. The important thing is that Janeway gets promoted to Vice Admiral. And lots of other people get promotions. The important thing is that Janeway is now an admiral. Because
Admiral.
my favorite summary of Voyager I've ever heard is by a guy called Anthony Oliveira. And he basically said that Voyager is the backstory of one of the morally compromised admirals that Picard is constantly challenging in The Next Generation. Voyager is just about how Janeway becomes that morally compromised admiral who makes all those really difficult, bad, according to Picard, moral decisions that he's constantly going, no, this is wrong, and they're going, we don't care. It's what you have to do. We're the admirals.
Exactly. We make real decisions, Jean-Luc.
Yeah, that's Janeway's villain origin story essentially. However,
the morally questionable adults are talking.
So some stuff that happens officially that's quite important. So in Star Trek Nemesis, the film, in 2379, the Romulan Senate is assassinated by a guy called Shinzon, and that's when the Romulans start opening talks with the Federation and start being a little bit more open and a bit more friendly. And that's kind of the last point where we have definitive, this happened, definitely.
Yeah.
The Star Trek Online canon has the Romulan Empire splitting, which is very much consistent with the history of the Romulan Empire, because this is where you get the split of Rome into Western and Eastern Rome. That's the sort of parallel we're going for here, if you're familiar with your sort of fall of the Roman Empire. So you have two groups. You have Empress Dontara, who's running the Imperial Romulan state, and you have Praetor Talalura, who's running the Romulan Star Empire. And those are these two fantastic sort of strong female characters in the sort of origins of Star Trek Online who are going at it, trying to control the Romulan Empire. In the midst of all that, as we discussed, obviously the Remans are uprising and trying to sort of fight for their freedom as well. And that is the backdrop that we sort of are getting up to by 2381. 2381, the point where this series is starting, is also when Spock officially goes to Romulus, because the Romulan star is becoming more and more unstable, and he's going as part of a sort of humanitarian mission to try and prevent people from being massively killed, but also on a diplomatic mission to try and improve relations between the Federation and the Romulans. And that is what starts
doing his best.
The new Trek film timelines. Is that whole nonsense?
That yes, the Kelvinverse.
Yeah. So that's happening in the background. Obviously, the Borg are continuing to attack the Alpha Quadrant. Jean-Luc Picard is probably appointed to lead the defense against the Borg. Whether or not Picard will follow up that threat or not, broadly that's happening. And then stuff like Cardassia is actually reacting really badly to sort of the collapse of their empire and recovering really poorly post-Dominion War. And the Cardassians generally have this problem where historically their empire arose because of sort of food insecurity. And so there's this thing called the Andak Project, which is where the Federation is going out to Cardassia to try and keep their farms running and make sure there's enough food physically for all of the Cardassians on Cardassia Prime. So that sort of level of food insecurity, again, is pushing the Cardassians towards maybe allying with the Federation more than they would. And whether or not that's going to be relevant, particularly for sort of Revity, might or not be true. But that is the situation broadly in the Alpha and Beta Quadrant, circa 2381.
And that's what you missed on Glee.
Yeah, broadly.
Oh god, don't give me those flashbacks. Don't need those.
Oh, you watched Glee. That's cute.
Everyone watched Glee.
I watched like 3 episodes of
Yeah,
Glee.
that's watching Glee.
Mhm.
Yeah, is it though?
Technicality.
Yeah. I brought you up hopefully to the present. I hope that is giving you some idea. Obviously, I can't read Eric's mind. I have no idea how much any of this is going to play into what his plot is building. But broadly, that is some important stuff that happened in the galaxy recently that you might want to know about.
And now.
There were so many more specifics, you guys.
There were so many more. Like,
If
again,
you-
just go back and watch all of Star Trek before tomorrow.
Except like
Meh.
the original series. Like
No,
just read,
all of Star Trek.
read a plot
You need to know
synopsis.
everything.
Just read a plot synopsis
You
of
don't
the
at
original
all.
series.
If you'd like more information, Memory Beta is the best place to go for your Star Trek Online canon, so stuff post the end of Voyager, and Memory Alpha for your sort of true prime canon as far as the shows are concerned. And it will do a year-by-year summary of every event that has happened in every one of the decades, if you'd like to go back and cover all of that. But that list is probably going to see you at least for tomorrow, and then
Exactly.
once I've watched the episode, I can work out what I think Eric is maybe going to use, and I can give you some more focused history if there's something we need to go into a little bit more detail about.
Exactly.
Should we talk
Let-
about characters now?
Let's talk about, so we have been having a series of reveals all of this week, essentially every day, getting a new character. We started with the chief engineer, but I think let's go the highest rank we know. Revealed
Mhm.
today,
Mhm.
played by the lovely Sam Delev.
My favorite child. not that I have favorites. It's gonna be Sam.
It's like everyone loves Sam.
But it's always Sam. Like clearly. Anyway.
Captain and Azeri Sol.
Yeah. This is interesting.
Oh, this is so fascinating.
Yeah, so we touched on Azeri Sol is an Orion. And we touched on the kind of incredibly gendered sort of nature of Orion politics, in that there's this idea that female Orions have incredibly strong pheromones, and the male Orions are essentially their slaves. Now, I don't know that Sam is playing a non-binary character, but I think it is a very reasonable assumption. Thinking about the Orions, who have this incredible kind of emotional sexual dimorphism, I guess, this incredible sort of push to dividing Orions into the females that emit pheromones and the males that don't and therefore are enslaved. It will be really interesting to see what non-binary means in that context, and whether there is some element of sort of being intersex, or if you want to sort of go about thinking about it in that binarist way, whether they're non-binary, sort of assigned female at birth, and therefore have to do something to suppress their pheromones or deal with the pheromone problem, or whether they conversely were assigned male at birth and have that sort of receptiveness to pheromones and that vulnerability. So there's lots of potential there.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot to do with Orion in Starfleet as well, as
Yeah.
mostly an antagonistic species against the
That
Federation,
you don't see in Starfleet very often.
if at all.
Yeah. And in such a high position of power.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. I don't want to
That's a good question.
yeah, and I think
We're gonna fall back on our age-old motto, which is more data is required.
Absolutely.
it's completely accurate. What I want to say is I don't think I will be really interested to see how Sam handles this, because I touched on kind of how binarist and how kind of intentionally gendered the Orions seem to be. And I think no matter what Sam decides as far as how much to tell us, how much kind of their whether or not they are non-binary, their character, like how much of their biology is known or understood and how much is kept secret because it's none of our business ultimately, I trust that there will be a lot of really interesting stuff just to come out of that.
It's so juicy.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
so juicy. And I think one of the additional things we've had with all of these reveals is these small little audio logs
Oh, yes.
that have been really fun and interesting. And with Azeri, Captain Azeri's log, we've got almost a bit of nervousness coming through. And whether this is nerves for any major backstory reasons, or whether it's nerves for being an Orion captain, what that kind of happens, especially if you're in kind of an exploratory or uh, ambassadorial vessel, because there is a lot of historical prejudice and connotation that comes with these things,
Mm.
which I'm so excited for Sam to tackle head on, and for Eric to have essentially like delightful verbal sparring with Sam, as they are to do.
hmm I am also really interested because we have a very interesting sort of makeup for our just our entire sort of bridge crew as a whole. And there's to broadly make the comparison to Captain Martinez on Children of Tomorrow, he was a very charismatic captain, and he led by his command skill. And was very much pushing the sort of diplomacy, for example. And it's interesting, given that we have Archie playing an ambassador who probably will be quite good at command and presence and those traditional sort of very Martinez captainy skills. It'll be interesting to see whether we have, again, that diplomatic style captain, or if we have someone like Janeway, who was much more about sciences and engineering and much more an intelligence rather than necessarily a presence.
And when we get into mechanics talk, I would love an insight-based captain.
Honey, that's wishful thinking that anyone in this group is ever going to make an insight check.
Oh,
Yeah.
I forgot that.
Yeah.
No, we've got some new people.
Yeah. We don't know.
We don't know.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
One of them makes an insight check before the end of the year. That's their 2020 resolution, is to make a single insight check.
There are only 6 attributes. There are only 6 attributes, and one of them is insight. So there's a 1 in 6 chance every check they make.
3 attributes in Cypher.
Yeah, okay, but
none of them were named insight.
None of them was named insight. That is my kind of the extent of my thought about the captain, which is I want to know what style of captaincy we're going to have. I'd love to know kind of how senior or not senior, given how sort of technically impressive the Ross is, and how kind of big and important this might be as a role. But really, I'm just excited to get to tomorrow and be able to actually find out about them and see and hear them and get a bit more of a sense of their character.
For sure, and I think this kind of leads into the fact that we don't know who the XO is.
No, we don't even know that it's a player character.
That's the thing. There's a lot of people have been chatting in the Whimsy Discord and the Oxcrew Discord of potentially a non-player character XO, which would be
because obviously Eric's in Shield of Tomorrow, Eric played Jiv, who was our chief engineering officer. So, my son. We may well have Eric playing an NPC kind of semi full time, and it would be really interesting to see that as the XO.
And I think because we've got Archie playing an ambassador, who I'd like to talk about now, we don't really have any need for a captain to be, as Kato said, super command focused, which means that the XO can do XO things of people management and support and operations without ever being limelighted. And then they can also not continually do the thing that Star Trek shows do and break rule number 1 of taking all of the senior staff and taking them to the planet.
It's definitely not rule number 1.
Break all the rules.
Except number 1.
Rule number 1 is the Prime Directive.
Yes,
the Prime Directive is don't interfere with pre-warp species development. It's the non-interference directive. It's not rule 1. Whatever rule it is, it's not rule 1.
It's rule alpha.
Yeah. So, yes, that will certainly be very interesting. But at the same time, it would be very interesting to see a Sam and Gina Captain XO combination.
But in the reverse from the old Doctor Who days.
Yeah, and there's other things to say, like hearing Bonnie's medical officer talk about how fascinated they are by the XO. Certainly, maybe lends itself to maybe that fascination is directed at Gina, because I think
that's a mood.
Gina is fascinating.
But I think it is very much, it's going to be one of those questions because while it's true, an NPC XO could fade into the background and allow the captain to take the limelight with the senior staff. There is that element of, why is the medical officer so fascinated with the XO? What is going on there? How does that work? Why? So even if it is an NPC XO, it's obviously an NPC XO that at least the chief medical officer is going to want to get to know a little bit better.
For sure. And do we have any crazy theories as to what the XO might be?
Ooh, Android.
Oh, cool. That is a good one. That did come up in my thought processes.
I love it.
I think, for fascination's sake, and because I'm a sucker, I want a liberated Borg.
That's nice.
I know, it is very nice. Just because of the potential of storytelling and how fascinating that would be to a medical officer dealing with the physiology changes of that Borg.
That's a very good one. Those are kind of my big thoughts, I think, actually. Because it has been pushed back so much, this is the one reveal we don't have. The other things, assuming this is Gina's character, other things I would maybe consider are something sort of like a changeling, so something kind of fantastic in that way, or an entirely new to the Federation species, the other thing. So an alien that isn't on any of our lists, isn't familiar to us, but maybe one that is from the Shackleton Expanse itself. So that level of kind of a new discovery, a new biology, is all stuff I can see the medical officer being really fascinated by.
Absolutely. So I think who do we want to jump into next?
Shall we talk about our Cardassian?
Oh, please, yes.
Okay,
please.
So Revati is playing Lieutenant Jane Lacat. We talked a little bit about Cardassia and their situation. I don't feel the need to sort of go into broad strokes what the Cardassians are about. What's important probably from a character point of view is that Cardassians traditionally are very faith, family focused. And very, very loyal and dedicated to their government. So they're very family oriented. They have this notion that their government is infallible, and they have this pressure on every individual within Cardassia to be infallible as well. So they're very self-reliant as a species, as a group, which is a really interesting set of character choices. I find the Cardassians one of the strongest, most well-written sort of set of characters. They are beautiful, strong characters. They're often villains, like Gul Dukat, but when they're sort of slightly more on side, like Yulin Garak, they are absolutely fascinating and delightful. And I think
Garak is one of the most interesting characters in Trek.
Yeah, Garak is a very special character. But we see lots of Cardassians through Deep Space Nine. If you're looking for good feels on the Cardassians, again, just watch all of Deep Space Nine. You've got time before tomorrow.
Exactly.
I'm going to shout a couple.
Just a few episodes.
I'm going to shout out a couple though. So, Chain of Command is a really good episode that will explain to you why everyone hates the Cardassians quite as much as they do in Trek. Sort of historically, that's an episode about Picard essentially being tortured by the Cardassians. So some content warnings there. But otherwise, Deep Space Nine episodes like Destiny, the one called Cardassians, Tribunal, and In Purgatory's Shadow are all a couple of examples of episodes that really focus on Cardassians and sort of are Cardassian-centric in a couple of different ways. If you wanted to pick up a couple of episodes before tomorrow in all that free time, you definitely have.
In all of the not a lot of time we have before tomorrow.
Yeah.
The thing that really struck me about Jane, so our new science officer, is that she's only a lieutenant. She's only a lieutenant.
Yeah, that was also really interesting.
She's the lowest ranked of all of our bridge staff.
Except for the unranked one.
Complicated.
We'll I would argue that the ambassador is not a member of bridge staff.
We also do have a Master Chief Petty Officer.
Complicated, we'll get into it.
Yeah.
The rankings, what are they? We'll get there.
She's quite a junior officer, certainly.
Yeah, a junior officer for a chief scientific officer position in a ship of this size.
Yeah, though we do know that this ship, the USS Ross, guys, I have to apologize. We definitely will not have time to get to the USS Ross tonight.
No.
USS Redacted.
USS Redacted. We'll go there in actual episode 1, especially when we know more about the Ross.
I didn't want to do a proper deep dive on the Ross and kind of everything that's going on with her until we got to the point where we'd actually seen her and I knew a little bit more about what elements of the sort of modified galaxy they were going to push in canon. But actually knowing that the USS Ross is a technical test bed, it's not that surprising that a science officer might be quite low rank, broadly speaking, because if you're going to have a technical test bed, what you want is to push your operations and your engineering side of things a little bit more than sciences.
Then we have a chief that's enlisted.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
But he may not be. He's unlikely to be the head of operations as opposed to just the head of engineering. So he may have some operation staff above him.
That may be another reason why we may have the head of operations XO being an NPC because of this testbed scenario that we're sitting in.
And also, like, obviously, technically, an ensign outranks a chief master petty officer.
Technically, yes.
Technically, but can you imagine the shit that if an ensign tried to pull rank on a CMPO? Like, it's never gonna happen.
No.
So, like, even though we're talking about being outranked in technicality, you've still got a huge amount of experience as a CMPO that you, like, I would argue that experience-wise, that would probably outrank a lieutenant.
Yeah, and especially when we're looking at Shield of Tomorrow is a good reference with Marla Ren.
My baby!
Who was essentially being prepped to take over from Jiv as chief engineer.
Guys, I just want to say, like, once we get through introducing everyone's characters, I have a whole thing about where they all fit in the rankings and the whole and how it all works.
We've got images and flowcharts. We have
a PowerPoint presentation.
What I wanted to touch on with the lieutenant is very much that her first name is Jane. So Lakat is a very sort of typical Cardassian name. It's something I'd expect to hear. You could easily imagine Gul Lakat being a Cardassian of some importance. Jane is very much a human name.
Absolutely.
And Revati has confirmed for us that that Jane is a full Cardassian. This is not that she is half human, half Cardassian. She is a full Cardassian with a human first name. And what that means for her backstory, her history, and why that is the name that Revati chose, I'm really fascinated to find out.
Super secrets.
Secrets.
And so this gives us a good segue, talking about the test bed, talking about the rankings, to talk about my delightful boy, who everyone in the fandom has already adopted. My boy Tech. Tech Lenatus.
Yeah, I like that. His name is Tech.
His name is Tech, and he's the techie.
He's the techie.
Which is Xander's PC for this game, and he sounds fascinating.
He does just sound really lovely.
He does sound lovely. He's got that accent to him, which we had it explained as the he speaks like a backwoods dialect of Bolian.
Which gets translated
as a
Minnesota.
Minnesota, Canada, something.
He's from Minnesota.
It's hilarious, and I love the accent.
I am really, before we jump into kind of like the crunch, I am really, really excited to see Xander as a full-time character.
Absolutely. And Revati as well, to join this crew as the new players.
Yeah, well, obviously we saw a little bit of Revati in
Beyond the Gate.
Geist.
Yeah, Geist.
And that was fantastic, but obviously we've had a little bit more time with Xander, and I'm also really, really excited to see Xander and Bonnie together because they riff off of each other so well, and also, if Xander and Bonnie aren't sat next to each other, I'm going to riot.
Next to each other or at the very extremes of either end.
Oh, don't make them do a Sam and Gina again.
Don't split them
hurt me. That hurt me, Kato.
But if they're on either side, they can library bards the entirety of the crew.
Oh, that's true.
Okay, I'll cope with that.
Yeah.
Just about.
Yeah,
so
I think
Bolians are really cool. That is like super emotive and kind species that I'm very excited to see how he's gonna work all that in as a character.
Yeah, broadly, I would say broad strokes, they're meant to be hospitable and outgoing, and just broad strokes. If you want to wear, they are blue, they are bold, they have forehead ridges, and they're polyamorous, which is pretty cool. There are no really good episodes that sort of center them because they are never really like main characters, generally, but they do appear across sort of Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and the Next Generation if you want to sort of try and catch a Bolian episode here and there. So actually they're a really, really good species to give Xander, because Xander gets the opportunity to sort of create a lot of lore about kind of more details of how they are and more elements of their history, because they're really not a species that's been centered in Trek just yet.
And we can already see he's already running away with that.
Yeah, and it is very exciting.
It is absolutely, and I think, uh, yeah, I want to talk about Aki last because there's a lot to talk about with
Uh-huh.
that character.
Uh-huh.
So
So Bonnie.
we're Bonnie, our chief medical officer,
What a good girl.
lieutenant commander, so the highest ranking of the senior staff outside of the captain so far.
That's a big jump. Lieutenant Commander to Captain.
Yeah, lieutenant commander to captain is so one would assume the XO is a commander.
Yeah, it's particularly on a vessel this size.
Yeah, for sure. Cation, we all love a good Cation.
Ugh, space cats are my favorite.
I think it's such an interesting thing because like they do get this like kind of weird derivation of just being space cats,
Mm.
but they're also a super interesting species.
Yeah.
Like they're like these like warriors. They have this love of art and science and advancement.
I will. Sorry, like just to broad strokes. If you are a species in Star Trek that is broadly not well defined, in any of the shows, so I would accuse the Bolians and the Caitians of both being
Yeah, for
kind of in
sure.
that space of not having the depth that the Cardassians definitely have at this point.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they've not been as sort of big and as featured. Broadly, what you will get is that they are proud warriors, but they like arts and sciences because that's all of the things.
That is
Uh,
that is
Yeah, I was
everything.
literally just about to say that's everything, babe.
It's not a very specific
It is
description.
very specific, but I think they have the. I was doing a little bit of reading on Mary Beta. They're
Mhm.
like philosophy is a big thing for them.
Yeah, apparently, and they're very social again.
Like
Importantly,
all creatures.
they do definitely have tails, and they have to have modified uniforms because of their tails.
That just makes me so happy.
Yeah, and broadly, if you want to sort of catch a bit more of the Caitians, the best place to go is Star Trek: The Animated Series, which is an
Absolutely.
animated show
Oh.
continuing on after the original series.
You can fight me. Star Trek: The Animated Series is the best Star Trek.
It's cheese. It's great. I think and that's why we didn't really see Caitians in the mainline show because they just couldn't afford to make Caitians.
Yeah, Caitians are hard.
Like
We've
didn't have the effects for it.
to the point where they were seen in some of the sort of later original
Michael.
series. Sorry.
Sorry. Sorry. One of our friends is sat watching the stream, bless him, in the same room as us. But I just said Caitians are hard, and he snorted and is now desperately trying to rein in his laughter.
Oh, good.
And he is a child. That being said,
We are all children.
we are all children because what was it? Did you say climax? And we were
Yeah,
like,
Kenner did say climax and we all
and
giggled.
yeah,
It was
okay.
great.
So I don't have a leg to stand on, but it was quite funny because I was just, talking entirely from a technical perspective, and then this literal child in my field of vision was like, "Yeah, you said hard." So anyway, please continue.
I have totally lost my train of thought after all of that.
That's fair.
Yes, I think I remembered. So in some of the original series films, so The Voyage Home and beyond, there are Caitians, to the point where they had to clarify that it was definitely Caitians they were trying to depict, because there's only one of them, and it's just a person in a cat suit, essentially. Sorry, I mean a suit that makes them look like a cat, as opposed to a cat suit.
Yeah, that is
but
actually a thing.
It was so unclear whether or not that design was meant to be a Caitian, because that's how rarely they appear in the live shows. So yeah, they're an interesting species, but again, not one that is centered, and that is a choice that we've seen sort of time and time again from these guys, is that these folks are making very deliberate choices to choose very different Star Trek races that aren't normally centered, which is great.
Yeah, and outside of that, we don't know too much about Bonnie's character. They had a very interesting kind of perspective on the XO, which we're all fascinated by.
I got some interesting vibes off of this character. Not necessarily broadly positive. I think Amy Dallin, obviously, during Shield of Tomorrow, played a very kind of strongly moral and very approachable doctor, someone we'd all love to have with fantastic bedside manner. Some of the way McCrell was talking, particularly around the XO, was a little bit more kind of scientific investigation and curiosity being pushed ahead of medical sort of best interest and sort of
For sure.
interaction with the patient. Now, obviously, for reasons, I'm a little bit more sensitive to that than other people might be. But I'm really excited to see different choices, and choices that directly contrast with the choices made on S.H.I.E.L.D. So having maybe this slightly more questionable medical officer who is still, perfectly adequate, but is not that Amy Dallin level of just, perfect sort of crushing sigh and has a little bit more dark undertones. That will be something that's really fascinating to explore if I have read it right.
I got a similar kind of vibe, but I'm not.
Much more clinical.
Yeah, but obviously we are going off of less than a minute of sort of audio dialogue,
for sure.
so it's very possible that I am making wild speculations that will be entirely inaccurate.
Wild speculations? That doesn't sound like us at all.
No, not at all. And that Bonnie,
I need to make an actual tinfoil hat
to
wear on the stream.
Yes. So Bonnie, I'm really sorry if I cast aspersions about your character incorrectly, but I'm really fascinated to see the direction we're going to go with Macro.
Absolutely. And then finally, of the revealed characters, we have our non-Starfleet personnel.
This was a really interesting decision, I thought, from Aki. And one I wasn't expecting. Like, I genuinely was not expecting to see non-Starfleet personnel. And having non-Starfleet personnel really then adds this layer of mystery and curiosity to what the story is going to be and why we have an ambassador aboard this ship.
Especially in a technical test bed.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's such a weird cross combination and it also makes me ask questions about our ambassador, about Aki's character, whose name I may pronounce wrong because it's hard. Is it Olin Madzin Neil?
Yeah.
I think is? Yeah, perfect. Nailed it.
I'd go for Jin as opposed to Zin on
I imagine, yes.
Yeah, just slightly.
And
yeah.
It offers so many questions about Olin, where it's, why are you on the ship? What has brought you here? Do you have a backstory, a history with engineering, and do you have this relationship with Starfleet? But the way that they spoke during the cinematic intro thing, they were invited out. They were invited to join this mission with Starfleet, which makes it seem like there is some sort of motive to this invitation, some sort of motive to potentially a Deltan.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Of course, it's possible just that there's going to be a lot more exploration in the Shackleton Expanse and a lot of sort of first contact, and they're really pushing the sort of ambassadorial role there. But certainly, there's a lot of potential for needing an ambassador. Potentially, if the Romulans get involved, or if there's a lot of Klingon tension, we could need an ambassador for those kinds of things to smooth things over in lots of ways. But yeah, it's certainly
someone that doesn't officially represent Starfleet could be a very great asset.
Yeah, but she still does.
Sure.
Sorry, but they still broadly will represent the Federation, I have to say.
Yeah, for sure. But there's the Federation and Starfleet, and some people have had not so great interactions with the Federation versus the Starfleet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Can I just here for coffee? I can see you in chat being confused. When we were talking about the CMO and the XO, we were saying Macrel had talked about the XO as being something that she was fascinated by, and an individual she wanted to get to know more from an intellectual point of view. We're not saying they're the same character at all. Macrel, Bonnie's character, is very much the CMO, but she's really intrigued about what's going on with the XO, which is why we were talking about that. I'm sorry if that was unclear. Just to pop back to that, because I can see chat.
Obviously, we can't name the XO because we don't have the name or the species of the XO, unfortunately. They remain a mystery until tomorrow.
Definitely. I've also seen that Geek Out is talking a little bit about not knowing anything about Deltans, which I think is probably worth jumping on.
I think we're about to jump in now.
But before we get to that, just to finish up your last point, what I think is very interesting is an ambassador is very much mechanically someone that is going to be command sort of heavy and presence heavy, which again is going to free up having Sam's character as the captain maybe go down a slightly more tactical or scientific or engineering route. Or we'll get a very diplomacy-heavy crew with a couple of different characters who can take arguments and discussion forward in different angles. And then looking at the rest of the crew, it will be a bit of science, a bit of medicine, a bit of engineering, which makes sense for the testbed ship. And then no tactical, I guess.
Yeah,
no tactical for Kato.
So I actually do want to bring up something
that sounds so heartbroken. That actually physically pained me a little bit.
Poor Kato. Don't worry, we will get ship combat. That has been confirmed by Eric, that we will get at least one ship combat.
Kato can have a little ship combat
as a
treat.
Absolutely. And before we jump into Deltans, there is something I want to raise. We are currently taking a guess at pronouns based on the players.
Very much so.
No, there has been nothing given about pronouns so far. in the spoilers or in the little teaser trailers. So we are guessing that both Sam and Arky, who use they them pronouns, are playing characters who use they them pronouns.
That may
And
change tomorrow.
Xander using he him, and the other ladies using she her.
But
Mhm.
again, that may
That
well
may change
change
tomorrow when we get a bit more
We
information.
will,
But-
revise based on further data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I did want to say that just to be a little bit clear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we could have pronouns, which would also
Yeah, of
be really
course,
cool and
absolutely.
exciting. Yeah, so Deltons, to touch on Deltons, they only have eyebrow and eyelash hair. That's the first and most important fact about them. And again, they're sort of telepathic and empathic. They're a little bit like a sort of sister species to Betazoids in some ways. And again, apparently, potent pheromones, very appealing.
So yeah, there's a bit of a not nice history with the Deltons.
Yeah, so really, if you want to watch the Deltons, I'm really sorry. If you want to see Delton content, you have to watch Star Trek The Motion Picture. And I can only apologize. Because you have to watch Star Trek The Motion Picture. Watch the shortest version of Star Trek The Motion Picture you can find.
Is that the trailer?
Star Trek The Motion Picture is a very long film. It's the first Star Trek I ever watched. I watched the director's cut of Star Trek The Motion Picture, which is an incredibly long thing to sit through.
That is a champion effort, Kato.
I'm
Yeah.
surprised you kept on with Star Trek.
Yeah, well, I was called upon to adjudicate a fight at my school between two people who were arguing over whether Kirk or Spock was cooler. And they said, Kato, you're a nerd. You're going to know about this. Is Spock cooler than Kirk? And I said, I don't know. I don't watch Star Trek. And so they sent me away with all of the Star Trek films and told me to come back when I had made my decision.
And what was the decision?
Spock is cooler than Kirk. At the time.
Absolutely. Correct.
Yeah. Which a little bit probably was biased by the fact that the person who lent me the DVDs was the person who was pro Spock in that argument.
Big move.
Yes. So you have to watch the motion picture. I'm sorry. Maybe just don't. That would also be fine.
Just
Arky
read a
will.
Wikipedia summary.
Yeah.
Arky will probably take us through the basics. Essentially, the Deltons, again, telepathic, empathic, and potent pheromones, and very appealing potent pheromones to lots of other species. And because Delton intimacy is meant to be both telepathic and physical, when you engage in intimacy with a Delton, your mind is endangered because it's a very sort of psychic concept as well as a sort of physical intimacy. It's psychic, and if you want psychic like a Delton, that can be a real problem. So in the motion picture, what's posited is that every Delton that joins Starfleet takes an oath of celibacy, kind of is forced to take an oath of celibacy so that they don't harm anyone by engaging in intimacy with them. And broadly, what has happened since then is there's been a little bit of backtracking on that to say not everyone takes the oath of celibacy. It's not forced upon them, but it's a sort of sensible, logical decision. Which is kind of how the Star Trek Adventures book that describes Deltons, that's where they sort of land on it, is that most people take it, but it's not forced upon anyone. The other thing to sort of say about Deltons is that we've had sort of confirmation from Arky out of character is that Arky is going to play an asexual Delton, so someone who doesn't feel sexual attraction probably. And that will be really interesting in combination with sort of having these very potent pheromones. And might sort of tie into maybe why they are here. If you have to take an oath of celibacy, but you are asexual, you might go, fair enough, that sounds perfectly reasonable. I've not lost anything in that game.
And I'm very excited for the way that they're going to take this and take this character with all of these different avenues that they have to them and all this different potential. So I think to wrap up a little bit, I think we should do a quick recap on how the game works. I
Okay.
think we should keep it short because we already have been on for an hour and a half.
I mean, at least 20 minutes of that is technical difficulty.
At least 20 minutes of technical difficulties, which we do appreciate you sticking with us.
Yeah. So I just want to sort of touch on that. Obviously, having an Orion and a Delton on the crew is going to make this a very pheromone-heavy ship for lots of reasons. So I cannot wait for the first complication that comes out of just pheromone overload somewhere, somehow.
That's going to be a fun, bad roll.
Oh, that's going to be the best complication.
So to sum up,
to
sum up, just because I think it is important, if we could go to the first of my slides that I've prepared.
Yes, we can go to the first of the slides that you've prepared.
And this will lead into
So
the
you're
sort
going
of
to lose our
notion.
faces for a moment,
But you
Chat.
will
Yeah.
be able to hear us.
but you will be able to hear us.
So this
Theoretically,
is just-
if we're doing this right.
You may, yeah. So this is just.
Ta-da! Oh no!
Oh no!
It's because you Googled something.
Because I googled something.
Oh dear!
Ignore
Look,
the Googles.
Google. Look at us trying to work out how bit rates work. Anyway, I have made this lovely diagram just to sum up the people we do and don't know on the crew. So at the top there, you can see the command team. And so command is one of the big departments. Basically, everyone captain and above is command. And we know that we've got a captain, and we probably have an XO that belongs purely to the command staff. Then looking over at the left of the page, obviously we've got the diplomatic corps, kind of separate from Star Trek, sort of separate from Starfleet, in fact. Not necessarily in that pure command structure, but because you're on the ship, you have to follow the captain's orders. Those are the rules. That's why diplomatics is off there. Then obviously we've got ops. We have no idea who the head of ops is. We know it probably isn't Thek Lindis because he's not an enlisted.
He's not.
He's not commissioned. Yeah, he's an officer. He's not a commissioned officer. He's enlisted. But we know he is head of engineering. And again, obviously, looking at ops, we don't also have a security officer or a chief sort of security. So we don't know who's filling the main tactical role on the bridge and that kind of thing. So that's engineering. Moving across to sciences, obviously you can see medical. We know we've got McCrell. In sciences, we know we've got Jane Lacat. Because Lieutenant Commander is a higher rank than Lieutenant, we can say that McCrell is probably the chief of sciences generally. She's probably leading that whole sort of division of the crew, roughly a third of the crew. The other important thing to note, the most important arrow on this flowchart, guys, is the arrow that goes from medical to command, because if you're the commander of the medical teams of a vessel, if you're the chief medical officer, if the captain gets sick, you're the person who turns around and goes, "You're sick," you're relieved of command, and hands things on to the next person down. And then over there we've got Con. Con is the most overlooked department, I would argue, basically because everyone in the con role is actually working towards a command position broadly. So that no one above Lieutenant Commander is going to be in con. It's a very generalist role. It's lots of people who will go on into ops or into sciences or into command itself. But they're over there in the corner. So looking at this, we know we've got one more PC to come. I would say the best odds I would give are for an ops and security officer, or for an XO, or for someone who is combining all three of those roles. Because we're on a big ship, we're on a Galaxy moderated ship that is the Ross class, it would make a lot of sense to have an XO who was purely up there in command and have a full-time ops officer beneath them, because there's a lot of people to manage on this big ship. But it's possible, on some of the smaller ships, your XO does have hybrid jobs, so it's possible we'll see that. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
I can't remember what the next slide is. Good.
Next slide is the ranks.
Is the ranks. Yeah. So this is just a quick slide for anyone who sort of wants the detail. Obviously, just to sort of note the grayed out ranks, or the rear admiral and the first chief petty officer. Those ones are all very much Starfleet command. You won't find them on the ship. Captain's the highest rank you'll find on the ship, and then below them, going down the ranks, you have commander, lieutenant, junior grade, ensign, and over on the petty officer side, master chief, senior chief, chief, petty officer, and then crewman for your NCOs. And in our ship, obviously, we know we've got a captain. We've definitely got an XO. The XO is the executive officer, second in command after the captain. Don't know whether or not that will be an NPC. It's just a total mystery, that one. Then you have a second officer after that. That's third in command. So you'll be familiar with this in Trek, roughly. Data is third in command on TNG. So you have Picard first, Riker second, and then Data third. And usually this is also a head of a division. So you can have a third in command who's also running ops, or a third in command who's also running sciences, for example. And that's kind of roughly where we're at. But we just don't know at that point. I was hoping to be able to go, this person's captain, this person's XO. I don't know. Total mystery. Man.
They've done it just to fuck with us.
But that's a nice summary of that. And after all of that, we can finally get to just a quick summary of how the game works. So if we go to my next slide, these are the most important things to sort of remember from the game. You've got your 6 disciplines, your six attributes. The disciplines, you'll notice, familiarity with that big flowchart I showed you a minute ago. So those are the 6 disciplines within Star Trek Starfleet. So you've got Command and Con, Engineering and Security, which are your 2 ops departments, and then Science and Medicine, which are your 2 science departments. And you can have a rank between 0 and 5 in them. And then your attributes are about how you are trying to do something. So are you doing it in a controlled way? Are you doing it bravely and being daring? Is it all about your fitness, just how sort of good your constitution is? Is it about your insight, your understanding, your presence, your sort of physical charisma, or your reason, your logic, your ability to work stuff out? And what you will do is you will take those 2 numbers, add them together, and that gives you your target number, which is the number you are trying to roll under. So meet it or roll under to achieve something. So just to remind you all, because I know everyone didn't ask me any questions about the mechanics of Star Trek, but I do feel like we should maybe go over them just a little bit.
Maybe just a little bit.
Little bit.
So we're back on the screen now.
Cool.
We've gone through the flowchart. I think big number 1.
Yeah.
And you did kind of touch on it, but we're aiming for 1s, people.
Yeah. Well, 1s are good, 20s are bad. You roll a 1, you roll a critical success, it counts as 2 successes. You roll a 20, it's a complication. The GM is going to make something bad happen.
I think that one of the biggest things to make sure everyone understands going forward, and it's kind of the juice of the system, is momentum.
Okay. Yes, that's absolutely true and completely valid. I think it is probably more important to just go through the sort of the basic stats of how you roll, because until you understand how you roll and what you're rolling and what you're trying to hit, the benefits of momentum I'm not going to read entirely. So say, for example, let's say you're going to try and fire a phaser, right? That's something everyone might want to do, and it's a standard check. So it's a control security check, and the target number of successes is always 2. So it's a difficulty 2 roll. Say I'm just an average security officer. I've got a control of 9 and a security of 3. My target number is 12. I'm going to roll 2d20 because the system is based on a 2d20 system. And so I'm going to roll 2 dice looking for 12 or lower. Say I get a 2 and an 18. The target number of successes I needed was 2. And I have one number that is under 12. So I've got that 2. So that's 1 success. So I've not succeeded. I've not beat that number of successes. I've only got the 1.
But Kato, what if you had a focus?
So if I had a focus,
can we describe what a focus is first?
Yes. So we've discussed attributes and disciplines. Those are the stats we put up on the screen earlier. The next part of your character is a focus, which is where you go, yes, I'm definitely a security officer, but I'm focused in, say, phaser fighting as opposed to hand-to-hand combat. So I've got a focus in handheld phasers. And if I had that focus, it would be like, yep, you're specialized. And what that does is it increases the chance that you'll get a critical success. So whenever you roll a run, it's a critical success, you get 2 successes. If you have a focus, the focus brings that number up to the number that your discipline is. So, for example, this hypothetical character is a security officer. We're looking at the security discipline, and my number is 3. So now, if I roll a 3, a 2, or a 1, I get those 2 successes. So if I had a focus, that 2 that I rolled counts as 2 successes, and I would have succeeded. I don't know if everyone is with us so far, but that is broadly how that works. The next sort of aspect to character creation is stuff like talents and traits, which it's easier to think of as like D&D feats. If you're sort of coming to us from a D&D background, these are sort of traits are expressions of your species' abilities. They're sort of essential to you, and talents are about kind of the talents that you have as an individual. So species traits are going to be more or less the same across a whole species. Talents are more about you as an individual. And these give... Do
you want to give some examples?
I don't want to give any specific examples because I just didn't bother to look them up. Broadly, these give you special sort of abilities. So they might give you an extra dice in certain situations. They might give you the ability to re-roll at certain times. So the big example of that is cautious. So you pick a department when you or a discipline when you say cautious. So you might be cautious security. So this hypothetical security officer I rolled up is cautious when it comes to security. Which means that you can unlock re-rolls for your rolls. If you're cautious and you spend momentum on a roll, you can re-roll one of your dice, which is really great. If you roll that 20, that critical sort of failure, and a complication is coming your way, you can go, oh, actually, I've got this talent that means I can re-roll that because I'm a cautious kind of person that doesn't that would go back and check, and that's the kind of in universe justification.
So you mentioned something there called a complication.
Yeah.
And momentum.
And momentum.
Yeah.
So let's have a chat about those.
Okay. So complications are broadly what happens when you roll a 20. They're the GM imposing a new condition on a scene that makes things harder for you. So say I'm trying to fire this phaser, and I roll really badly. Instead of that 2 and that 18, I roll a 20 and a 17. I completely miss. That 20 unlocks the complication. So not only do I miss the target I was firing at, but instead I hit something essential. Say I hit the lights and it all goes dark, or I hit some sort of area of the ship and now there's a leak and something is leaking out. And so now we're under a time limit and time pressure. Those are the sorts of things where the situation changes rapidly via the complication. Momentum is this other sort of aspect of the game. It's a really nice way of sort of creating a snowball effect with your sort of characters in your play. Because every time you get more successes than the number required for the check. So say this was a difficulty 1 check and I got 2 successes, I'd gain 1 momentum. And I put that momentum in a pool that everyone on the team, everyone on the crew shares. You can have up to 6 momentum at a time, and you can spend them in order to gain advantages. And the most common way to spend them is you spend 1 to gain 1 extra die to any roll you make. So it's like giving yourself a little bit of a boost, a little bit of an advantage, that extra chance to make that check. Now, if that combines with something like cautious, for example, where if you spend momentum, you also get to re-roll, it's essentially giving you 2 more chances to roll the successes you're looking for, plus a chance to remove that complication there. So that's broadly what momentum does. It has lots of other uses. You can use it to create advantages for yourself. So you might say be on a planet, and normally you go down to the planet and you're exposed to a large number of horrible weather conditions. And normally you'd go, okay, these weather conditions are going to impose a penalty. And you go, can we spend 2 momentum to create the advantage that we all brought our exposure gear and we're all kind of prepared for this kind of environment? And the GM might go, yeah, that's fair enough. That's the kind of advantage.
And then on the other side of the screen, you have threat.
Yeah, threat is the GM's own personal momentum pool. It is generated in roughly the same way that it's generated for the players. So when the NPCs have extra successes, their threat pool goes up. They have a basic stockpile to start with because the GM uses it to create more drama and more complications for you as you play. So he needs a little bit of a back pile just in case, in his back pocket, just in case you're sort of gunning through the adventure really successful and there needs a little bit more tension. He can spend it.
Go on, finish.
He can spend it in exactly the same way the players can, but he's going to spend it a lot more to make those complications happen and to make things harder for the players, to slow down the game and to give you a little bit more difficulty and a little bit more tension.
So one thing I did want to touch on with momentum is that it's a group pool.
I thought I said that, but
I just want to make it quite clear that everyone puts in and everyone takes out. And the way that this game really gets going is there's this constant upping and downing of the pool of momentum, and you end up, if you go over your limit of your momentum, over 6, you're kind of forced to spend. So you want to make sure that you are doing as much as you can with the momentum.
Yeah, it very much is like momentum. The more momentum you have, the easier it is to gain momentum. Like Just Here for Coffee says, broadly you need momentum in order to be able to gain extra dice, and extra dice increase your chance of succeeding, which increase your chances of succeeding over the target number, which increase your chance of generating momentum. So once you've got a little bit of momentum, it's very easy to generate even more momentum. Conversely,
a kind GM will generally give at the start of sessions or stories some difficulty 0, difficulty 1 checks to get you a small momentum pool to start with.
Yeah. Conversely, if you're having a bad day and you're just rolling really poorly, you can get stuck in a place where you don't have the ability to, you just don't have the momentum to spend. And that leaves you in a position where you really need to generate momentum. You need those extra dice to roll harder. And there is only one thing you can do, and that is give the GM threat. So at the same cost of momentum that you would normally spend, you can say, I'm going to give you extra threat. And the GM will go, okay, I'll pocket that threat. I'll make a complication later on. I'll give you something else to go wrong, which can give you that extra die just to get the advantage, just to get you out of the current predicament. But obviously, because you paid for it in threat instead of momentum, rather than using your earlier successes to build more success, you're pushing failure down the line and creating more problems for yourselves down the line.
And one thing that Eric has been known to do with threat in Shield, and I hope he brings it to the Clear Skies table, if they are taking too long to make a decision, he says, the longer you take, I'm going to keep adding threat. So you need to make a decision quick, or that threat is just going to pile up and pile up and pile up.
Yeah, 100%. It's a really nice way to push your players forward without having to go for an actual timer, but to create that sort of that time critical thing of, we've really got to move on, and prevent a lot of discussion and a sort of, the circular arguments you get into as players. Yes, broadly, that's kind of how a rule works. The other things to say are the difficulties. You can go up from 0 to 6. So you can need as few as 0 successes to succeed. It's still worth rolling because you might get 1 or 2 successes, which is obviously 1 or 2 momentum to your pool. Difficulty 6 is very difficult. Things that should be physically impossible. You're going to want to have a full bank of momentum, and you're also going to want to maybe use stuff like determination. And this is part of one of my favorite mechanics of the game, which is the values mechanic. So broadly, in Star Trek Adventures, everyone is pretty good at their jobs. Starfleet is full of very competent people who know what they're doing, and Star Trek Adventures does not push progression in terms of watching your numbers go up, improving your stats. But what instead it does, it pushes your character growth really well, and it pushes sort of RP-related growth really well through this system called values. So at the start, everyone defines 4 values that are statements about what matters most to them in the world. So examples from Shield of Tomorrow would be stuff like, you help who you can where you can. Or, violence is a last resort. Or Cardassians are monsters. And these are values and these are values that you have that express the sort of the essential things about you, and your core and essential beliefs. And you can call upon them during the show to say, I'm going to use my value. So I'm going to use the fact that I believe you should always help who you can where you can to gain an extra die and spend my determination. And that die comes in automatically at a 1. So when you spend your determination, you automatically get 2 successes, which can really boost you if you're trying to get up to that sort of that higher number of checks, that 6 number of successes. And every time you activate a value, that's considered to be part of your sort of ongoing character growth, and pushes you towards higher rewards as far as progression and character development. But the other thing you can do with a value is if you're in a really tight situation and none of your values apply and you still really need that success, you can choose to burn a value. And you can turn around and say, I'm going to burn this value. I'm going to cross this off. I am in such a tight situation that I no longer believe, let's take all Cardassians are monsters. I no longer believe all Cardassians are monsters. I'm in a situation, I really need to help a Cardassian, and I can't do that while applying my values. So I'm going to turn my back on this value and help this Cardassian anyway. That still gets you that determination. It still drives the narrative forward, but instead it's about a moment of crisis, and being pushed towards a sort of character growth and character change. And those are the kinds of things that this system does really well. Is actually the soft mechanics of pushing character growth and RP through your character progression. And it's why I really actually like some elements of the character progression system, because it has this beautiful sort of RP heavy relationship where you only really progress if you've done some good RP and if your character's been forced to grow and change over the course of the adventure.
So Kato is actually talking about a thing that actually happened in our Star Trek game.
Yeah.
So if you are curious and want to listen, check out the Below Decks podcast, the actual play game that we've been playing. You'll see my terrible captain being a terrible, terrible person.
He's the worst. And
everyone else being good people.
Mm-hmm. It's a really beautiful thing. That is broadly how things work as far as just your basic roles. Yeah, I've skipped over some of the uses of momentum and determination because I just wanted to focus on the most common ones because they're the most likely to come up in these first couple of episodes. Just because they're the ones
complicated, we'll have a talk about.
Yeah.
Head to the Kato's Crunchy Corner.
As and when. So Just Here for Coffee has a question. Yes. I believe. So balancing your role using momentum and hoping for crits can make or break an attempt. With crits, you can, in theory, achieve 4 successes with 2 dice, which is true. Do you risk that or buy extra dice using momentum or threat? Yeah, it's very much that thing of you've got to risk it to get the biscuit. If you've got threat, and yeah, you can end up in really sticky situations if you don't have momentum or if you're burning a lot of threat. And when you're given a sort of a level 6 check.
You kind of just got to go as hard as you can.
Yeah, or you've got to think about why the GM is telling you that this is basically impossible and what you should do. Yeah, does anyone have any more questions, anything else that just while we're sort of wrapping up, while we sort of do our wrap-ups and things? Do you have stuff? Lads, blokes. You're meant to be helping me cover for this.
What
do?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that we may not have too many questions at the moment. We've already had a quick chat about the world and everything. I think we'll get plenty of questions when we move through the series and we have some big moments, big mechanic things, and how they will impact. So I think for now, if you have any questions, head over to Twitter, bother Kato.
If you would like a slower and more nuanced discussion of how the mechanics work than that whistle-stop tour of the fundamentals of how you roll, please at me on Twitter. If you would like, literally any.
On Twitter.
Yeah, just Kato, aka Kato.
Yeah.
Kato, aka Kato, for all your Trek lore and mechanics needs. Apparently, I'm really happy to answer questions. If I know what you guys are concerned about, what you're confused by, it helps us to answer those questions next time on the show, or I can just get back to you on Twitter. We're really pleased to do that sort of stuff.
I think if we get enough questions and more interest about some things, Kato and I might do another episode of What the Federation and do a bigger deep dive into the world and maybe a bit of mechanics as well. But if anyone wants Dragon Age shitposting, where should they look?
They should come to me at Captain_Tiny, because Captain Tiny was taken by some inactive women on Twitter, and justice will never be served. One day I will get the handle I deserve. But yeah, so come follow me at Captain_Tiny for rat content and Dragon Age shitposting, because I love Dragon Age so much, you guys. And if you want cool, terrible tinfoil hat theories, where should we find you?
You can find me and all of my terrible thoughts and in just incomprehensible dreams at Kung Fu Panzer on Twitter. Obviously, you can find, you should hopefully already be following Azimuth Games Twitter, and I really appreciate everyone so far that has kind of come out and supported and followed the Azimuth Games Twitch. We appreciate it so much.
That's adorable. Big thank you as obviously has to go out to our wonderful cast and crew of Clear Skies, who have been like super supportive of the show launch and the podcasts that we were doing, and big love to the podcast's hosts Craig, Laurent, and Casey, who we used to podcast with. We miss you guys a lot. Unfortunately, time zones.
They are
a bastard. Bring back Pangea. And I was gonna thank somebody else, and I've forgotten who.
Q Times.
Yes, thank you.
So Q Times have been a great help. We're just like, we have no idea what we're doing. Someone help. And
they did that.
They did that.
We are very grateful to everyone over at Q Times for just being all around the best. So make sure you're following them, partly because that's obviously where Clear Skies is going to be, so we hope you'd be following them, but also just because they're really cool people, we should all go, give them some support.
And in the future, we will be aiming to get around an hour-long episode. I think we had the technical difficulties and a little bit more to cover just with the introductions.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking about an hour. The most we want to be going is an hour and a half, depending on if there's some really like meaty character stuff and like story stuff to get into, but hopefully we're aiming for about an hour. Same time on Sunday, so that's 7 p.m. UK time and
11 a.m. PST or PTT.
Although we should note that because I am going to a concert like a cool person tomorrow, next week we will be broadcasting on Saturday and not on Sunday.
Yes, next week will be Saturday. And if you'd like to watch the VODs, you can watch them on Twitch. We're going to leave them open no matter what. If we get affiliate or whatever, they'll always be open. You can also watch them on YouTube. I'll be uploading those as quick as I can. It does depend on, life is a thing. So unfortunately, capitalism. But appreciate everyone who is watching this VOD right now. Thank you so much. Thank everyone for coming tonight and operating some really nice discussion. We're going to try and get a little bit more chat integration moving forward. I've got some more plans and ideas for the stream. But otherwise...
Yeah, we were going to be using my tablet, but unfortunately it died.
Otherwise...
it won't even charge anymore, so I guess who's getting a new tablet, I guess.
Me.
All right.
Not them.
Well, until next time, Mitch, what's the forecast for tomorrow?
Forecast for tomorrow. Pretty sure that's clear skies. Thanks for watching, guys.
Thank you.
See you soon.